You know, history is full of villains who were treated like heroes and heroes who were condemned. But what about the people who were just right? Right about something huge, something that could save millions of lives or expose massive corruption, but nobody listened. In fact, they were mocked, they were punished, they were ignored for it. So today, we're going to dig into the stories of 6 people who were totally vindicated by history, but only long after the world had already turned its back on them. It's a really interesting question when you think about it, right? We all like to believe that the truth eventually wins out. But wow, that journey to the truth can be absolutely brutal. For the people we're about to talk about, the price was, well, it was their reputation, their freedom, and sometimes even their lives. So, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the scapegoats, people who got blamed for tragedies they had nothing to do with. Then, we'll cover the silenced, folks who were punished for speaking some very dangerous truths. And finally, we'll get to the unheeded, visionaries whose brilliant ideas were just laughed out of the room. All right, let's dive in. We're starting with 2 of the most infamous cases of the 20th century. These are stories where everybody, the public, the justice system, they were just so desperate for a villain that they turned on the very people who were either the victims or even the heroes. Now, on the surface, you'd think their stories couldn't be more different. I mean, a grieving mother in the Australian outback and a security guard at the Atlanta Olympics. But when you get to the heart of it, they are identical stories of how a false narrative, once it grabs hold, can absolutely destroy a person's life. Okay, so this was the claim that just captivated and horrified all of Australia. During a family camping trip, Lindy Chamberlain's tiny baby daughter vanishes from their tent. Her explanation was immediate, and she never, ever wavered. A wild dog, a dingo, had taken her baby. To most people, it just sounded impossible. You know, like something from a dark fairy tale. With no other explanation that made sense to them, suspicion just zeroed in on Lindy herself. And the thing is, the case against her was built on practically nothing. There was no motive. The key piece of forensic evidence, this supposed blood in the family car, was later proven to be just sound deadening spray from the factory. But still, she was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison, all while she was 8 months pregnant. The wait for justice was just agonizing. She wasn't let out of prison until 1986, and that was only because a piece of her baby's jacket was found near a dingo lair. But it took until 2012, 32 years after her daughter disappeared, for a coroner to finally officially apologize and confirm what she had been screaming from the rooftops all along. A dingo took her baby. A very similar, gut-wrenching story of a hero-turned-villain happened with Richard Jewell. For a few short hours, this guy was an American hero. He was a security guard, spotted a suspicious backpack at the Olympics, he alerted the police, and he helped clear the area, saving who knows how many lives. But then, almost overnight, the FBI and the media completely flipped the script. He went from hero to prime suspect. For 88 days. That's how long Richard Jewell lived through a special kind of hell. He was never arrested, never even charged with a crime. But he was put through this relentless trial by media. They painted him as this wannabe cop who planted the bomb himself just so he could find it and be a hero. His life was just torn to shreds. It took nearly a decade for the truth to finally come out. In 2005, the actual terrorist, a man named Eric Rudolph, confessed to the bombing. Jewell was completely, 100% innocent. The Attorney General at the time even said, "I think we owe him an apology." Jewell spent the rest of his life, which wasn't very long, suing news outlets to clear his name. He died in 2007, a vindicated man, at just 44 years old. Okay, so our next 2 stories are, well, they're a bit different. These people weren't just wrongly accused. They were actively, maliciously silenced by incredibly powerful institutions because the truth they knew was just too dangerous to get out. So here we've got Martha Mitchell, the wife of Richard Nixon's own attorney general, who tried to blow the whistle on the Watergate scandal before anyone even knew what Watergate was. And then we have Alan Turing, the absolute genius who cracked the Nazi Enigma code, only to be destroyed by the very same government he helped to save. Martha Mitchell was not a quiet person. She was a well-known, very outspoken socialite in Washington, D.C. So when her husband became the head of Nixon's re-election campaign, she started seeing some, well, disturbing stuff. She actually started calling reporters, warning them that the campaign was involved in all kinds of dirty tricks. And just a few days later, the Watergate break-in happened. What happened to her next is it's unbelievable. To shut her up, her own husband's security detail allegedly held her captive in a hotel room. They ripped the phone cord right out of the wall, and they forcibly injected her with a tranquilizer. Then the White House launched a whole smear campaign, painting her as an alcoholic, as mentally unstable, as delusional. And the tragedy is, she was never truly believed while she was alive. But after she died of cancer in 1976, one of the Watergate conspirators came forward and confirmed her entire story. President Nixon himself would later say that without Martha Mitchell, there would have been no Watergate. But the final, most poignant validation came on a funeral wreath with a simple, anonymous message. Martha was right. And now we turn to a man whose mind literally changed the course of world history. Alan Turing was the brilliant mathematician who led the code-breaking team at Bletchley Park. His work cracking the supposedly unbreakable Nazi Enigma code. It gave the Allies this decisive advantage. It's estimated he shortened the war by at least 2 years, saving millions and millions of lives. And his reward for this world-saving achievement? Persecution. In 1952, Turing was arrested and convicted simply for being a gay man. Instead of prison, he was forced to undergo a year of chemical castration. He lost his security clearance, his career was completely ruined, and 2 years later, he was dead. It took until 2013 for the Queen to grant him a formal royal pardon. So our final 2 stories, they represent a whole different kind of tragedy. These are the visionaries, right? The pioneers who showed the world these life-saving discoveries, only to be met with total ridicule and professional ruin, all because their ideas challenged how things were supposed to be done. Just look at this data. It's undeniable. Back in the 1840s, a Hungarian doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis noticed that women were dying from something called childbed fever at an insane rate in one clinic. He had a theory. Doctors were carrying deadly particles from doing autopsies straight into the delivery rooms. So he made a simple rule. Everybody washes their hands. And look what happened. The death rate plummeted from 10% down to just 1%. The results were clear as day. You'd think they'd build statues of the guy, right? Nope. His own colleagues were insulted by the idea that their hands were dirty. They mocked him, they drove him from his job, they absolutely ruined his career. His mental health just fell apart, and he was eventually committed to an asylum where he was beaten by the guards and died. His life-saving idea wasn't accepted until years later with the rise of germ theory. Okay, our last story is about a mayor in a small Japanese coastal village. Now, this mayor, Kotoku Wamura, had lived through 2 deadly tsunamis, and he was obsessed with protecting his town. He pushed through this massive, incredibly expensive project, a 51-foot-high seawall and floodgate. A lot of people in his own community called it a ridiculous waste of money. They totally ridiculed him for it. And then, March 11th, 2011, one of the most powerful tsunamis in recorded history slammed into the coast of Japan. Town after town was just wiped off the map. But in Wamura's village, the wall held. Sure, some water overflowed it, but the village and all the people in it were saved. Wamura had died years before, but the project everyone mocked him for became his heroic legacy. So, from the scapegoats to the silenced to the unheeded, we see this really clear pattern, don't we? The truth can be deeply, deeply inconvenient. It can challenge our egos, our institutions, our whole understanding of the world. And a lot of the time, our first instinct is just to attack the person telling it. When you actually lay it out like this, the scale of the injustice is just staggering. We're talking decades, sometimes a whole lifetime to correct a horrible wrong. For Alan Turing, it took 61 years just to get a pardon. For Lindy Chamberlain, 32 years to have her horrifying truth officially accepted. I mean, these stories really teach us that vindication is never a sure thing, and it is almost never quick. And this brings us to the final, and I think most challenging question. It's so easy for us to look back with 20/20 hindsight and judge the people of the past for their blindness. But it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Who are the whistleblowers we're calling crazy right now? Who are the visionaries we're calling wasteful? Who are the people telling inconvenient truths today that we are getting completely and totally wrong?